Finally, as we move through this roster of experts, let me welcome Dr. Arvind Subramanian, who's going to join us. I don't know if he's there yet. Are we there?
Hi, Jeff. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So technically, we've actually managed this so far. It's pretty impressive. You've been listening to this conversation.
Yeah.
Dr. Subramanian. Let me just introduce you very quickly. I'm sorry. You were, until recently, the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India from 2014. I think you left in 2018. Is that correct? And now you're a fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And I'm finding you in Cambridge. You're also working at the Kennedy School. Is that correct? You know, let's stay on this point that Dr. Benaguaho was making about America and its brains and its talent. Because you're here, you're currently not in India. You're affiliated with two august institutions of research and reason. What's the disconnect from your analysis as a semi-outsider? What's the disconnect between the wealth of information that Americans have? Peterson Institute providing great information, obviously. Kennedy School filled with very, very smart people. You're in Cambridge. Danielle Allen is there. Everybody's there. What's the disconnect? Why haven't we incorporated scientific thinking as much as we should have in the early response to what happened?
You know, I think, Jeff, at one simplistic level, you know, obviously you want to say this is an out consequence of the leadership that you have, and you know we can have that discussion forever and ever. But I guess it kind of speaks to the kind of deeper problem that America faces, right? That you know it's more that something about the polarization that's happened over the last many years in the U.S. That's led to this complete kind of different, universes where if there isn't basic agreement on the facts, on the science, on basic rules of organization, it is going to manifest itself in political dysfunction. So I think it would help us better to kind of not see this merely as a problem of kind of political leadership, which can change, hopefully, over time, but as something, a kind of political dysfunction that stems from something deeper about, what's been happening in the U.S. over a long time, the inequality, the polarization, and all of that. And I'm not the expert on that, but it does seem, to be something more than just, bad transient leadership.
Right. Do you? We can come back to this in a minute. It's an important subject also about elites and their cures for people who sometimes don't want to take the cures that the elites are handing out. But let's talk about an area of your expertise. One of the questions that's on people's minds is, what is this going to cost? What is it going to cost the United States? What is it going to cost in the UK? What is it going to cost globally? My question to you, as an expert on the IMF, on banking, on the World Bank, my question is this: what will it cost to get the pandemic under global control? And does the world currently have the will, the collective governments of the world have the will to actually spend what it will take to bring this to a manageable level by the fall of this year?
Yeah, see, I think as Prime Minister Brown said, at the national level, many countries are acting very decisively. The failures at the international level, which is a different way of saying basically that, developing countries will not have the resources that they need, because the advanced countries, they can print money, they can issue debt, they have the money. So when we talk about the lack of coordination and the inability to generate resources at the international level, we're really saying that there are lots of poor countries out there who will not have enough resources to combat the health dimension and then the economic dimension. So these are, I think I've not actually costed the amounts, but clearly, at least on the economic side, we know that Gordon Brown's number was $2.5 trillion. But the fact is, we're not even remotely close to coming up with anything like that amount. So we might, it strikes me as, the exhortations to cooperation seem to me as useless as, not appreciating how exactly at the moment we need this leadership is when I think we're kind of almost functionally are unable to provide it and will continue to be so for a very long time. I talk about, we talk about a G0 world, so it's not just, no leadership. I actually think we're in a G-2 world where, the major powers, the US, China, to some extent Europe, not just are they not providing global public goods, they're actually providing global public bads. So if this is, if this is the kind of context for cooperation, the kind of background reality for cooperation, you can exhort whatever you want and, call for more and more sums of money. Look at actually what happened at the IMF meetings this time. You got a little bit of, moratorium on debt, but we got nowhere close to the resources that we need. And moreover, the point that Gordon didn't make was that even the money that's available, the big difference between the national and international is in the national, unconditional, whatever it takes. But the international level, it still comes with strings. And so it's not just quantities, but also conditionality, tied aid, and all of that. So I think we're really very, very far away from, we're not even close to the kind of cooperation that we need to address either the health dimension or the economic dimension.
So let me stay on this question of leadership, because I'm interested in how much you think this is a question about the quality of individuals or the durability, sometimes the malevolent durability of systems. Of global finance, for instance. What I hear you saying is that you think a better set of quality leaders would have made a material difference over the past 3 months. Is that fair?
In this instance, I think it might have made a difference. Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. Would you talk about? Go on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think because, for example, on the SDR issues, IMF generating more resources, it seems like there were very few countries that almost all the world was behind it. And but for a few, leaders and countries, we might have got a little bit more. The other, of course, structural problem is, part of the G-2 world also, Jeff, is that, it's the whole US-China relationship, which doesn't necessarily, it's not just a matter of leaders, is a matter of, the whole rising power versus the status quo power, how they handle that. So that's kind of a more structural, deeper thing as well, which is over and above whatever happens due to,
right.
weak position.
Well, stay on that for a minute and talk about whether let's say in the zero-sum sweepstakes between China and the US, neither party, neither government has exactly covered itself in glory over the past couple of months. But do you think that China has really lost a step here? Or do you think that the US response to its own pandemic problems has cost it a level of credibility that otherwise it wouldn't have lost?
I think actually both have happened. I think both the US response has, led to a lot of loss of credibility, and the kind of Chinese response, both initially in terms of what happened in terms of, the outbreak of the crisis and how much information was or wasn't shared, and the fact in the cover-up. My own sense is that, I think there are two kind of parallel things happening both in the US and China. My sense is that both are weakened internally. US because of what we've discussed about. China, I think basically that social contract internally between, citizens trading off their liberty and freedom for more order and prosperity. I think that's kind of, it's looking wobblier than it used to, one. And second, you think about also the fact that, China's international role via the Belt and Road Initiative, all of those things, that's now also has to be reassessed because, it's been lending on onerous terms. Its clients are now weak. they probably can't repay. And so the whole Chinese gambit at soft power, so not just internally, but its gambit at soft power is also going to be weakened. And as a result, this G-2 world is really going to come in the way of, a cooperation going forward.
Right. It is an interesting moment, right? Because China, most of the countries that ring China would rather be in a strong alliance with the United States than with China for a set of obvious reasons, from Vietnam to, well, draw a circle. But the United States, at least in this current iteration of American leadership, just seems uninterested in capitalizing on that. And I wonder if you have specific thoughts about the opportunities lost in that sense. Then we'll come to India in a second, but I want to just stay on that for 1 minute.
Yeah, of course, it's an opportunity lost. I think that, but the problem, of course, Jeff, I think we have to be careful here, because if you think about it as a status quo power, I think the attitude toward China is more bipartisan than I think we're willing to accept in the United States as well. So it's not just a kind of erratic leadership, missing opportunities. It's as much, structurally, how does a rising power cope with a status quo power, cope with a rising power that is very different, that has, does things in, slightly, sometimes strange ways, sometimes acceptable ways. So I think it's that bigger systemic kind of structural power transformation thing, which I think, because this is going to survive after November as well. These set of issues aren't going to go away. One thing we haven't spoken about, of course, in all this is in the global response, how countries are closing trade and actually making the problem worse for each other. Medical supplies, food. Part of what was good about globalization was that yes, the pandemics were global, but the ability to respond is also global. And we're foregoing all those opportunities in terms of getting medical equipment. In sub-Saharan Africa, many countries are net food importers. If countries are going to choke off their exports of foods, this is going to make the problem even worse.
Well, let's end here on this biggest question, sort of where we started an hour ago, on globalization. Is this going to turn into a profoundly anti-globalization moment? Or is there going to be a refinement of what globalization means? Or are people going to recognize the inevitability of interdependence after this pandemic?
I think, Jeff, I'm a little bit more
predict the entire future of the world, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Obviously, I'm more pessimistic for three reasons. I think the world is going to reevaluate its reliance on China for a number of things, including things like, pharmaceuticals, essential things and so on. So I think that's going to happen. In my own country, India has imposed, kind of restrictions on Chinese FDI into India. So I think that's going to be, there's going to be kind of broader deglobalization, but some of it targeted at China in particular. So that I think is the second thing I worry about a lot, which we haven't seen as yet, is the movement of people. I think if you look at the Gulf, for example, the number of migrants that are stuck in that, and what's going to happen to them when they go back. The immigrants in the US, you've seen what the administration has done in terms of visas and so on. So I think the movement of people, a little bit more self-reliance, at least on critical commodities, I think these are going to change. And of course, I think the whole Chinese foreign direct investment, I think we've always had this national security concern, but I suspect it might spread beyond that. So I'm more on the skeptical or the pessimistic side. I'm not saying that's desirable, but I suspect we might well evolve in that direction.
Well, we'll have you back again, and maybe you'll be slightly more optimistic by then. I don't know, but we'll have to see. But I want to thank you very much, Arvind Subramanian. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today for this first experiment. Let me thank my colleagues at the Atlantic for all their hard work in pulling this together. I want to recognize Chatham House, the Peterson Institute, and of course the Emerson Collective, for this new initiative, and to stay up to date on the latest information and insights about coronavirus. It's not like I'm reading or anything propaganda for The Atlantic, but I am. You should actually visit theatlantic.com. We have great coverage of all aspects of this crisis, and our coverage is free and in front of the paywall. We've done that as obviously a public service, as many others have done. But of course, we do hope that you subscribe. I personally think it's worth subscribing. But again, let me thank all of our partners in this, and thank you again to our audience and our guests for joining us. Thanks very much.